I want to talk a little bit about these riots going on in LA right now over ICE agents deporting people. Now, this my channel is not about politics, and I'm not going to get into the political side of all this, but I do want to get into the, let's say, motivations of probably the majority of these young men, mostly young men, out there. I'm sure there's some young ladies out there doing it as well. When I was younger, it would have been very easy for me to get wrapped up in this kind of stuff. And not to say it's because I had like strong political views. I had, really strong ideological views on immigration and stuff like that. It was just, I was a troublemaker, bottom line. I was a troublemaker. I loved push back against authority any chance I could get, and going out and fighting with the cops and smashing windows and stuff was right up my alley as a kid or as a young adult teenager. And had a lot of this uprising and all this Antifa violence and all this stuff happened when I was younger, and I was around it. I wouldn't have gone out of my way. I wouldn't have drove 3-4 hours, or go to a different state to get involved. But man, I was half hour, 45 minutes outside of LA when I lived in Southern California, and I would have showed up just to get in some trouble. And I think I guarantee you, that's probably the motivation of the majority of these protester/rioters out there. They don't care about deportation. They don't care about Trump. They don't care. They have no political stance or ideological stance on any of this stuff. They just want to go out and cause problems and push back against authority and maybe steal a couple of boxes of sneakers, to be honest with you. That being said, it's scary to think, I watched a clip this morning talking about how bad, a lot of these kids, a lot of these people are going to screw their lives up. If they get arrested for assaulting an ICE agent, there's a lot of FBI out there too. If they get arrested for assaulting an FBI agent, those are federal charges. You're going to lose your right to vote, which, obviously this is a political deal. So they're going to lose their right to vote, to even, use their voice in voting to make a change. And they're going to lose their right to buy firearms. And, if this gets any worse, they're going to wish they had that right, So yeah, I mean, it's scary to think that I could have ended up there. And it saddens me that so many young men are aimless. They're aimless. They think they're looking for an in group. They don't fit in. When I was a kid, I hated, part of my hatred, I guess, for authority was being forced to go to school. And that's why I pushed back against all authority. Cops, my parents, teachers, the principals, all that, security guards, all that. And so many of these kids are just aimless and they're not holding these political views. They're just looking for a group that they can identify with, who also is frustrated and mad. Like I was frustrated and mad about, my, I don't want to say trauma, but my hatred, I guess, for authority, so they're falling into these groups because they're accepting them and they're using them basically as cannon fodder. They don't care about them. They're using them for their political views, and these kids are getting sucked up in it because they're the outcast, you know? I was part of that whole counterculture scene, I guess you could say, when I was younger. You know, I was a skateboarder. I wasn't the high school football player. I was, you know, skateboarder with a mohawk and going out, you know, jumping fences and breaking into buildings and busting windows and, you know, spray painting graffiti and stuff like that as a kid. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what what's going on with these young men. And we need to get to a point where we can understand them a little more, I guess, and figure out where their frustrations come from. You know, I know what troubled me, but you know, what's troubling a lot of these young men is it seems like a lot of it is, you know, the dating market I know is really tough on young boys right now. They feel like everything they do is wrong. You know, they're punished. You know, that whole Me Too movement screwed up a bunch of stuff with boys now. They're too afraid to talk to girls because everything is, is essay. Kids are so soft these days that everything you say to them is some sort of microaggression and they get offended. And, you know, young men are being told they're bad at every corner. You know, toxic masculinity is bad. Like, everything is bad to these young boys, and they're lashing out. They're just lashing out to lash out. They're frustrated and they don't fit in. And, you know, what better way to take out your frustration is to find a group of people that want to cause some trouble, to be honest with you. So it's unfortunate, you know, a lot of these kids are going to screw up their lives probably long term. And not to mention, you know, they're destroying their own city. you know, I, as a kid, like I said, breaking windows and stuff, I was ruining the school I went to, or, you know, wherever else I would skate and cause problems and spray paint, you know, the neighborhood. So I don't know what can be done. I mean, at this point, we definitely need to figure out ways to reach these young men and teach them that they don't need to be part of this whole, you know, it's kind of counterculture now to be a Christian conservative, to be honest with you. It's kind of weird how all this has flipped, you know. Being a Christian conservative and starting a family and buying a piece of property with some chickens on it is like the new counterculture. I don't know. It's pretty wild. It's scary to think too, like how far are these riots gonna go, you know? It's I don't want to say the SW word, but you know, everyone keeps talking about a civil war, but it could be possible. You know, it could be possible, and they're just confused young boys, aimless young men. They need some guidance. They need something to strive for. They need they need a higher power. Honestly, you know, the more godless people get, and that was probably a lot of my issue, you know, growing up, is I grew up atheist. You know, I grew up atheist, and I didn't surrender to a higher power. You know, I was my higher power, and my wants and my needs took precedent over everything. And yeah, something's got to change. It's not getting better by burning down LA, I'll tell you guys that much right now.